whatever you do. Okay, let's begin the meeting. And call roll call is Carolyn Campbell.
Yes, here.
John Collins.
Here.
Carl Kaminsky.
Present.
Larry Smith will not be here. I'm here. Tracy will not be here this morning either. Okay. Do I have on Carrie? I have Keelan.
Here.
Crystal Lake, Abigail.
Here.
Do I see anybody else? That's it. Do we have a quorum? Oh, Tim Huff. Been talking to him all the time. Good thing you're here, because
I think that gives us
do we
That's a
have a
quorum?
quorum?
7. Yeah.
Think of a 7? Yeah, okay. We got a quorum then. Whew.
I was really on the edge.
All right.
So glad you.
Meeting, minute approval. I have a motion for minutes.
I'll make
John
one.
Collins makes the motion.
I'll
Carl
second.
Kaminsky seconds. Anybody have anything? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? You don't look like we have any public comments. Do we have any member comments? Okay, let's move. Action, discussion and consideration for approval of the Stormwater Ordinance Amendment of Article 2, Section C, Paragraph 1C, exempted development. You want to go over that?
Yeah, so it's in your packet. I try to give you a little header there at the top so you guys can see it. It's really just a modification here. Number 1 in paragraph 1, a little bit of inconsistency when we were discussing in the TAC that this should be an exempted development as long as you're following the listed items. But then it does indicate that it still needs to be reviewed and approved by the enforcement officer, which is not really the intent. Otherwise, that would make it seem like you're coming in for a permit still. So we struck that line there, and then we did a slight modification to A and B there to basically change it such that any work to existing buildings with no changes to the footprint, in both cases outside of the floodplain, would not require a permit. If it's in the floodplain, what we do is we review it for a substantial improvement. If you're unfamiliar with that, basically a substantial improvement constitutes a greater than 50% monetary value. That investment is greater than 50% of the structure value of the structure only per basically the township assessment, or if the applicant wanted to use their own assessor, they can certainly do that. So basically why we did the changes previously, there was, and this would affect this definition of maintenance of 2 existing buildings, which was a little bit conflicting. Actually, I didn't include it in your packet, so I can pull that up for you guys real quick so you can see that. But the way it's supposed to work is any work to a structure, if there's no exterior changes, we're just going to exempt that if it's not in the floodplain. If it is in the floodplain, then we basically ask people to submit what we call our 50% rule. Let me get to that part real quick for you guys. But our 50% rule is basically that it's a cost estimate so that we can assess whether or not that substantial improvement is established. And so when people are submitting now on our online portal, essentially it's going through a stormwater review, and we're basically indicating to them that there's a deficiency, please provide us the estimate. Once they provide that to us, and we can record it and confirm it's not greater than 50%, then we exempt the building permit. So like for water heaters in the past, we're issuing stormwater permits for those. So even though it's not that substantial improvement, and it used to cause a lot of headaches for us. So now that will clean that process up to where we're still tracking that information as we're required by FEMA, but now we're not issuing a stormwater permit for something that is not required under the ordinance. So here is the definition of maintenance of existing buildings: re-roofing, replacement of windows, reciting, carpeting, painting, installing a new water heater, installing new electric service, and maintenance tasks that do not require a building permit. And that's the conflict, because a water heater does require a building permit, but yet it's listed under maintenance activities. So that's why we decided to just do away with this definition under the exemption language and just say any work, to make it a little bit clearer and easier to understand for anyone. So that's what this is. That's what this amendment would do. It would strike this definition and modify.
So it's any work
the language.
permit or no permit.
What's that?
So any work permit or no permit is exempted.
So, well, it would only be exempted if it doesn't meet that substantial improvement criteria.
Right.
So if someone, even in like a renovation, if someone, was under, then it would not be a permit. When the structure is in the floodplain, we just asked that that paperwork get submitted to us before we can officially exempt. You. So that one does require a little bit of a review here, but these other components are not part of that. So in this case, under A, it's no questions asked. We just look to see if the structure's in the floodplain or not. In part B, we look to get that information. So in this substantial improvement under our participation with the NFIP, we actually track it over a 5-year period. So it could be that maybe 2 years ago, they did some major renovations where they got themselves really close to that 50%. And we try to have those conversations with folks, like, give yourself some wiggle room. If your electric goes out, your plumbing, something happens where now you need to do repair work, drywall, you need to open up the wall, I don't know. Give yourself a little bit of a cushion, because if you exceed that, then you're triggering floodproofing requirements at that point, essentially, which might mean you need to elevate the structure or do other modifications that are obviously big financial implications to anyone that, if you're not ready to elevate a structure, that's going to be obviously a big impact on the wallet. So,
Carolyn?
Okay, so that, you just said something that made me realize what you were trying to do. Because I'm thinking, even if it's substantial improvement and you base it on value, I was thinking this was, if it gets into the floodplain, part of this is you don't want it to flood other properties because now you're building within the floodplain?
this would technically be existing buildings. So any new buildings this wouldn't apply. You're going
Oh, so the existing building within the floodplain, so then, okay, so you're not really worried about it creating an additional flood hazard. You're saying the 50% because if this property floods.
Potentially puts them at risk to be able to rebound quicker. So you've just taken, you've just remodeled and a flood comes in, damages everything, and now you have to rebuild again, but you just spent, a decent amount of money doing that. So there's under layers of insurance built into that. So part of this is that as insurance claims were tracked over the past 20 years, the payouts were just increasing at an astronomical rate. And basically, there wasn't enough money for some of these flood damages. And so this is a way to try to bring more resiliency to folks to say, if you're making a significant investment here into this home, you may want to consider meeting some of these floodproofing requirements so that a flood doesn't come in and potentially now you already sunk that money in, and now you don't have any money to repair anything that might need repairing from the flood damage.
So if they wanted to take that risk, they couldn't?
They couldn't under the ordinance, no. And that is actually coming straight from FEMA. As an NFI, if
Because
we
they're-
don't, yeah, if we don't permit substantial improvements, they will pull our NFIP status, which means then anyone trying to get a loan and needs flood insurance, they wouldn't be able to do that because we don't qualify for the program.
So that kind of is the starting point.
That's why I said there's underlayers there built into that as a bigger story of
Anybody else?
connections.
Okay, now, on our agenda here, it says discussion and consideration. So we're talking about it. Now, do we want to approve this?
I leave that up to you.
If we do want to approve this, and I didn't call for a motion to approve it before we had our discussion first. Because we need to discuss it first to get to that point. So if, at this point, does anyone want to make a motion to approve this?
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Kaminsky, what?
I'll second it.
Mr. Huff seconds. Okay, and do a roll call. Mr. Huff?
Aye.
Ms. Wilgreen?
Yes.
Noonan?
Yes.
Campbell?
Yes.
Collins?
Yes.
Kaminsky?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. That'll move forward. Discussion items, possible action, discussion regarding updates to runoff rate reduction detention requirements.
Yes, I tried my best to lay this out in the packet for you guys for it to make sense. So bear with me, we might jump around a little bit to demonstrate some of these for you guys that might be a little bit unfamiliar with what does this exactly mean, or what is the process when the engineer's looking at it to meet the requirement. The page here that I have up on the screen, basically what I tried to do was block out the different sections and then have them discussed later on. So looking at number 1 there in the ordinance as is, this is a pretty straightforward basically interpretation with the caveat that I will say new impervious area is impervious area that's been added since the original adoption of the SMO, which was in January of 2004. What staff does is we go back to our aerials. We have a 2005 aerial. We basically use that as kind of our, now the accounting for new impervious area begins. So that's sometimes what we try to do. We'll take a current aerial, we'll go back to 2005, and we'll try to compare and get our numbers to get a accurate calculation of the 20,000 square feet.
So I have a question on that.
Yeah.
On some of these farmsteads and all that, where they have a bunch of small outbuildings and everything, all those are calculated in impervious.
Those would be
So
included.
from 2004 or 5, when you have a photo of that, many of those are gone. Does that give credit against that 20,000 square
Yes.
feet?
Yes.
So if there were 7,000-foot building taken down, you would credit the 7,000, so they'd have 27,000.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jim. And then any kind of layouts, we will certainly do that. We're limited in our information, so sometimes people do come in, hey, that's been there forever. I'm not disputing that, I need the evidence that shows that. So I have worked with people. One guy, went to some library, pulled like a 1965 picture or something of their farm. I said, great, we'll run with that. So yeah, we do try to do our best to account for that and grandfather those in. So I'm gonna skip down then to the update or the proposed change here. So we took a look at that threshold. A lot of pretty much everybody else is at half an acre. And in discussions, the 20,000 square feet comes from the idea that some time ago, it was looked at that 1 acre equaled about 40,000 square feet, so that's where the 20 came. So our suggestion here from the TAC would be to just call it, half.
Sherry came on.
Oh, no. Yes, one acre equals about 43,560 square feet, for anyone curious. So, a half acre, that's what the number comes up to. So we're just looking to stay consistent with that half acre in terms of the trigger. In TAC, we haven't really found good evidence to push beyond that or lower it, and we're just looking to keep consistent with really how everybody else does it. So if there's no questions there, I'll go ahead and jump back up to number 2 for the exemption portion. The way that the ordinance works here, and this is a little bit confusing, is essentially you go through the effort of calculating your new impervious first to figure out if you're over the 20,000. Now, I didn't box number 2 down here, but as part of that 20,000 square feet, you can exclude any linear impervious surfaces less than 12.4 feet wide from that calculation. So as the project moves forward, if this is exceeded at any time, then this linear exemption no longer is not applied within the box of number 2. So when number 2 says 1 acre or less of new impervious area is created, that would include the linear impervious surfaces down here. So just for clarity. So the first exemption is 1 acre or less of new impervious area, not to exceed 10%. And then this kind of vague statement here that the development shall not result in flood damage. And then the second exemption that was worked out is this 5% agricultural conservation easement that has to be recorded, and again, not resulting in flood damage. So the issues here are really based on the conservation easement. It's not meant to be a conservation easement in the normal sense. It's just meant to identify where people are proposing to have their 5% impervious. And that's kind of a roadmap, so as they continue to move forward, we can kind of check that and they can adjust that as they go along. So that's how the ordinance currently works. Any questions there before I go to the change? No? Okay. So now jumping down to the change, what we're looking to do is just go to a, yeah, sorry, I'm jumping around between the two.
No, sorry.
So what we're proposing to do is to just go to a 10%. No easements, no requirements. This will simplify the process. So as part of that, as I mentioned, and I'm going to jump back real quick, as part of those exemptions, it does indicate adequate downstream capacity and not result in flood damage. So we looked at it and said, well, okay, what does that mean? What do we want people to provide to us to show that there's going to be no impact? So in most cases, really what that's doing is saying, well, here's the existing condition and here's the proposed condition, and you're just comparing the two in terms of flows. Really beyond that, unless we know that there's some kind of issue, ongoing issue there that we can kind of rope in or that can be considered, that's really, as engineers, what we're doing is we're comparing the flow before and the flow after. Obviously, if the flow before and after are the same, or if the flow after is less, then one would have to conclude that the situation shouldn't be any worse than what is out there currently. So that's kind of the mentality that we went forward with. Now in this case, and I'm going to start jumping around a little bit on you guys, so feel free to stop me at any time. In this case, to do that analysis, what we're hoping to do is eliminate the potential for needing an engineer in some of these simplified cases. And how we're planning on doing that, and I'm going to jump to one of the spreadsheets here, so bear with me, is to create a tool like this. So what you're seeing here is an example spreadsheet tool from NRCS that they use. And really, the applicant would be responsible for punching in 2 to 3 certain items here that would then spit out a result. And this result would help keep consistency not only for staff when reviewing it, but it would give anyone that is familiar with the process an opportunity to be able to use this. But before I talk about how we're gonna get here, I do want to bring up the fact that we discussed in TAC for the possibility to have a consultation or like a service that staff can provide, much like staff plat or CUP pre-application processes. This can be done once or twice a month with a sign-up sheet where someone can come in and, you know, maybe there's a fee or there isn't a fee, or, you know, obviously you guys can decide that, where they can sit down and go through the process and make sure that they feel comfortable filling this out, or staff helps them along to fill that out, to be able to get that information and data.
You know, you discussed that intact. Does that need to be implemented into this in writing?
Yes, this would be part of the idea. Otherwise, if we don't have this, basically, it would be the person going to an engineer to do that analysis for the existing versus proposed flows as part of the exemption.
So it's not included right now then, that
This-
we're officially going to do it?
No, this is just, you know, making sure that you guys are okay with the idea of staff, you know,
So
putting.
we're not gonna vote on this today?
I wouldn't, because there's still some other numbers and things to
Just wanted to,
discuss.
that's what I was getting at.
Yes, this is purely a discussion to get your feedback, so that when I go back the next couple of rounds with TAC, we can understand how you guys feel about some of that, how you feel about the spreadsheet tool. So part of this too, we're planning on updating our website, or it's gonna walk you through this. So if you wanna fill this out, we're gonna indicate, here's the tools, here's the different things that you're gonna use.
So next question, do we have staffing availability to do something like that?
Well, we should, but that's why we're thinking that if it's capped to once a month or twice a month on a certain time block, then staff can work around that, and we would have someone available to work that. And so if we get a high increase request for this, it would be, hey, the next available slot is, you know, in 1 month, and we can see how that's going. If we get a high flux of this, then, and people are complaining, well, I can't get in there, we'll have to revisit this. I don't know exactly if this is gonna generate a lot of interest, if a lot of people are gonna use it or not, but this would be something that we would be able to accommodate. To be honest with you, we already basically do that. I mean, we get phone calls every day, you know, reviewing things, hey, can you take a look at this, what about this, what about that? So it's already built in now, it's just, we're gonna have a designated time slot for it, and if someone asks for this, we'll indicate, you know, just take a look at the sign-up sheet for the next available slot type of thing in order to get help. Otherwise, go to our webpage where it's all laid out. You know, that's the idea, to make it easy to follow for someone. But this is something new. I don't know anyone that offers something like this, to be able to use it for permitting purposes. You know, some other agencies, like the city of Chicago has something similar to this, where you fill out a spreadsheet type thing. So I know that it's not a unique idea. Just in terms of some of our other counterparts, I don't think anybody's using something like this to try to streamline the process a little bit, lower the fees for engineering needs, or if an engineer wanted to use it, they can certainly use it, which hopefully is a much quicker and faster process for them.
Carl?
This information that you have here, this is what's gonna go on down your slide to what actually looks like an IRS tax form. Is that where this is going?
I'm not sure I followed that.
You have the
You're in charge of the
worksheet,
worksheet.
and it's
Toward the
like,
end.
I hear you saying, you know, this is for the folks, you know, they can fill this out, and I'm looking at that sheet and I'm like, I can't remember half them figures from college.
Well, again, it's not for everyone, and if you wanted to use it, that's where
Okay.
we wanna open it up, to folks that would be in that position and get a staff consultation. And whether or not that should be a fee that staff charges for that time and whatnot, that would be open to discussion, but that's what we felt like, yes, there will be the person that this is foreign to them. Hey, it's great that you have all this stuff, but I don't know what it means. And so we feel confident that this is a simplified process where we can, within an hour or two, should be able to do it. Like I said, my engineers are kind of doing this already. Because when people are coming to us and we don't know some of the implications, we try to, as part of county service, we try to give them an idea of what to expect. So we have some of the more sophisticated programs for this. It doesn't take long to set up and to run some quick numbers to get an idea. So we do feel confident that we can do this and that it wouldn't somehow be detrimental to our everyday activities, although like I said, we're already doing a lot of this when people are asking for help or asking questions or, in general, trying to give them advice whether or not they should think about detention or where they're at, how much detention may be, so.
Okay,
All right, so,
Can I ask a question
yeah,
on that?
sure.
Excuse me. So when you're looking at this, you're looking at, we talk about amount of rainfall, that determines flow,
Correct.
right? Is that what you're looking at?
Yes.
Because I was just sitting in, with the Northwest Water Planning Alliance, they had Ford trying to come in and talk from ISWS. And that really what they're trying to start looking at is the intensity of the storm, because that's impacting how quickly the water flows off. And we know for sure that there's gonna be longer and more intense storms as weather patterns are showing that storms are gonna be more intense.
Yeah.
And the more intense they are, depending on the type of soil, can actually create more runoff, not just in terms of volume, but how quickly it comes. And they're finding at the most intense storms, more than half is running off. So I don't know how, I know we can't create a lot of additional metrics for those consultations, but I don't know, are we looking to start incorporating the fact that this type of storms we're having is changing?
So that's a great point, and we can incorporate that in here. So these rainfall amounts that you see here with the storm frequencies, those are right now being pulled from, now on this spreadsheet, we're gonna orient ours a little bit differently, but our ordinance, I'll go to that real quick for you guys on the screen here. Our ordinance has a table here, rotate, where you're talking about the shorter storm durations, and here are their values listed here. So right now, the ordinance basically regulates everything to the 24-hour, 100-year event. We could, as part of this, look at some of these other ones as well. If that's.
What do you mean by that?
So, if, for example, in this spreadsheet that I have, that I'll go back to, we could look at, well, what happens in a 2-year storm and what happens in a 100-year storm, for example. So now you're comparing two different storm events, and maybe it's trying to see what that difference is in the existing and the proposed, and maybe it's two triggers that in the 2-year, we want that the proposed, doesn't increase by a certain amount, and in the 100-year that it doesn't increase by a certain amount, let's say. We could tier that. I don't disagree with you that the higher intense storms are more prevalent, so we could look at that's maybe more critical to capture and say, maybe the 2-year or the 10-year storm is a better way of looking at it. But I can certainly bring that information back to the TAC for discussion.
Okay,
So just real quick, going through this spreadsheet idea. So we did look to develop our own curve number table to keep it consistent. So that's something we're working through the TAC. So this will eliminate variability of having engineers trying to use a different table, if you will. This will kind of standardize the process. So that's basically these curve numbers are taking into effect the ground cover. So as you see here, paved surfaces, pretty much 100. If you're at 100 curve number, that means everything's running off. The reason why paved surfaces are at 98 is you still have some water even after rain. You can still see there's some water left on the surface, but that's the idea. As you go to more grass cover, those numbers are coming down, indicating there's less runoff, and so that's a factor that comes into the discussion. And that's again another thing we're hoping that with categories like this, people will be able to go and figure out their curve number. Again, if we offer that consultation, staff will help them determine that as well. And then this is a more robust version of trying to figure out how long it takes for rainwater to go from point A to point B on your site. But it can be easily kind of simplified to the point where all someone has to do is potentially go to our Plan Dev Viewer or Google Aerial and take a measurement. Okay, I'm going from point A to point B, entering that distance, and then the spreadsheet should really.
is that your tax form?
Yeah.
This is what you're talking about, yeah. So what this is really meant to do is just indicate distances. It is all really, and it's just a sophisticated way to do that. But the idea is that there's already a spreadsheet created, so we can eliminate searching for some of these values, because a lot of them do end up being static. Or we can have a little bit of simpler instructions where it's a drop-down menu. Maybe there's 1 or 2 options that are normally chosen, and we would probably feel comfortable with either of those. So, and like one of those is it paved or unpaved? So, you know, it's stuff like that really for this. But so then the other only criteria that makes it a little bit more difficult is figuring out the tributary area. Here it's listed as watershed area. So we are working with GIS to develop a flow tool where someone can click a point on the map and it will spit out an area for you. So we're hoping to develop that. So after we do that, really the tools are simple. Someone goes to that tool, clicks on their property, they're gonna get the area. They can use an aerial to get the distance. The curve numbers are there in terms of description.
I got to shoot myself one minute.
Okay. And so therefore everything can be entered in pretty seamlessly and pretty smooth. So that's another reason why we feel that staff can handle this, because if those tools are there, taking a measurement, clicking a point, getting the area, reading the curve number, it's not meant to be a time-intensive process. So that's how we're looking at this to have that tool available. So there's no questions there. I'll skip back up then to indicate how staff and TAC is looking at it. So that's part A there that I described, all of that information, curve number, the tool, etc. So what we're currently doing is trying to figure out then, well, what do we feel comfortable with? You've taken the existing area and you've gotten a flow, let's say it's 10 cubic feet per second, then you take your proposed and you have an increase. So what value of an increase can we sit there and comfortably say that this shouldn't be an issue? That's why I highlighted these numbers. So this is more of a representation to give you guys some structure on how it might look. In our process, we thought it would make sense to have some kind of breakdown between, well, 1 acre is going to look a lot different than 20 plus acres, so having some categories, and then saying that the proposed flow can't be more than a certain number of the existing flow. And so in our efforts to try to nail that down, we're creating some examples. We're taking a look at what, the flow would look like in a 12-inch pipe, what do standard ditches look like. And we're trying to attribute that to maybe a high water level rise. A lot of times we're trying to keep everything to not rise more than 1/10 of a foot. So for example, how this might work is, let's say you have a tributary area that's, I'll just go in here, let's say it's 4 acres. And in that 4 acres, maybe and I'll just stay with the highlighted number, maybe a half a CFS. We know that in a 12-inch pipe or standardized ditch that McDOT DOT puts out the certain bottom and side slopes, maybe half CFS we know would only raise that high water level in that infrastructure by 1/10 of a foot. So that's kind of the connection we're looking to make to have these numbers. And once we have these numbers, it makes the process straightforward on what does it mean that there's minimal flood damage and that there's adequate downstream capacity. The third part to that would be that we would have that confidence in those numbers, and now we have a tool that gives you an ability to evaluate that and basically spit it out. Here's your existing, here's your proposed, based on your tributary area. Are you green, are you red because of that increase? One other element we could throw in there is to say that for known areas, to give municipalities a discussion that I've had, if there's a known area where they know it's flooding, then maybe there's going to be some ability there for the enforcement officer to step in and say, well, we know there's flooding, so actually, you need to use this other number if we're going to exempt you from detention. Or maybe, unfortunately, due to the issues here, we just can't exempt you because this intersection is already flooding severely. Yes, we've got future plans to fix this area, but until then, unfortunately, we can't have the situation get any worse. So that obviously is something that we can build into the language to allow that possibility. So that would wrap up the exemption. So again, simplifying the exemption to say 10%. Also, we're not sure if potentially we want to have a cap on that 10%, because if there's no cap, if someone comes in with 200 acres, then potentially that's a lot of impervious area. So we are looking at potentially, should we enforce a cap, 10% up to 20 acres or 15 acres or something along those lines. I think TAC in general, from all the members, seem to think, yeah, we probably should, just because that can get out of control if someone gets an exemption for a huge amount of impervious area. But at the same time, if we have these tools and these calculations, someone that goes too large might not be able to meet this anyway, so maybe a cap doesn't make sense because it might be captured in this analysis. So going through that process to try to see. So that's why in here, number 4, I have greater than 20 acres, which would uncap it at that point, right? And so if you can't meet that, then you can't meet the exemption, so there's no point in a cap if that's how we want to go too. And we would probably prefer that it's captured in the analysis instead of trying to figure out a cap, because then the question's always going to be, well, how'd you come up with that? So, so just something else. So looking for feedback on that, early thoughts. Obviously, we're going to try to get these numbers ironed out and be able to come back with some more structured language for you guys, but that's the general idea. And maybe before I take your question, I'll jump into one of the examples real quick, because this is going to parlay into number 3. So for example, I gave this is a real site. So the idea here is in the existing conditions, you have these 3 different tributary areas. One of the main items, so downstream capacity, the way that it came up was, this is about a 7-acre site or so, maybe a little bit over, looking at the numbers. But imagine now if you have more in the subdivision, and this is kind of the issue that we've seen, is you have these different tributary areas, and what ends up happening is the developer comes in and takes that huge chunk and says, well, I'm gonna take everything and I'm gonna send it down here. Obviously, this tributary area that was meant to go this way, whether it eventually meets up, you know, further down with here, with this tributary area, it might go through 3-4 properties, right? So, but the idea is now that you're taking more water and sending it down here. And that was part of the main reason why adequate downstream capacity was brought up, is in that type of situation. In this new analysis, you really wouldn't be able to do that because, again, you're looking at these existing tributary areas and saying, well, in the existing conditions, this is releasing at a certain flow. This is releasing at a certain flow. Under what we're trying to do, we're trying to make sure that at each point, it's not getting any worse. So just want to give you guys that visual. So sorry, John, if I made you lose your thought and question, but I just wanted to show that.
So 2 questions now. The first one was, what's the time, is there a timeline on this, getting this done?
So yeah, we're trying to move as quick as possible. Obviously, with each tax session, we're hoping to meet each new hurdle. I have a meeting with GIS on this flow tool. I think towards the end of the month. I forget what the date is.
Okay.
So yeah, we're looking to do it as soon as possible, I guess. We feel confident that they'll be able to do that. And as part of their budget, apparently, this flow tool might be something that's actually new, that might be able to do more. It might be able to do some of this actually, where we can even set it up. I don't know. The demonstration's coming at the end of the month,
Okay.
but at a bare minimum, I think we would be able to, at least if you click on a point, it would show you the contributing flow area. It's all based on grading and topo.
Okay.
So we feel confident that will come, but it might end up being more robust where we can actually, so Carl, to your point, instead of using this accountant spreadsheet, that tool might be able to analyze some of that, which would be great because now it's even less input that's needed to make this run than previously thought. So more to come as more is known on that.
So, and I apologize for my ignorance on this. So in this example on the left, would the developer in this case had to provide the measurements for the existing condition and the new proposed condition?
Correct.
Okay.
So in this example, let's say they're trying, and this example is meant more for when you actually trigger detention, but it would be the same idea. Let's say that they're looking for the 10% exemption if they have the property. I don't know that works out here, but let's
we'll just
forget
use
the
some,
numbers,
yeah.
right? What would happen is basically their proposed condition, their flow path. Now this is a little bit different because there's a depressional area, but their flow path would essentially, what you do for the flow path is you're looking for the highest point and then it flows down to the lowest point. So that might be their new flow path. What ends up happening though is when they're comparing, they will be comparing to this smaller tributary area as opposed to both of them because they're not maintaining this flow route anymore. So they would be looking at the existing flow from this smaller tributary area to the proposed flow of now this larger tributary area. Most likely what it's going to say is, hey, you're not eligible for the, because it's too much, it's almost double.
Okay. Okay.
So it's all automatically going to say, hey, you're not eligible for the exemption because we're concerned of what's going to happen for these neighboring properties down here. You're going to have to look at some kind of detention.
That's what,
Yeah.
I was, okay, perfect.
So, and
That's
as I
fine.
mentioned, you know, we previously in this committee and in TAC, we've been discussing the downstream adequate capacity components. This automatically helps deal with a lot of that, you know, to some extent. Obviously, you can still have downstream issues where the enforcement officer of the municipality knows of those issues, can enforce, you know, something a little bit more restrictive, but, you know, it helps alleviate that. So then the other point would be, if it does work out, that doesn't exclude you from then still trying to figure out, okay, well, what's happening down here? Even though we're not affecting the flows, you still might need to build some kind of pipe there to help because there's still no flooding. So it still doesn't alleviate to do that, downstream capacity check potentially. But that's something that's part of the discussion, and that's why if we feel comfortable enough with these values, then maybe it alleviates, that concern, that the increase is minimal.
But we'll have an exception in there that would allow staff to override B
Yes,
based on other factors they may be aware of.
correct,
Okay.
correct,
Okay.
right.
All right.
They still have, TAC still has some work, and you still have some work on this one.
Yeah, right now, like I said, we're trying to figure out if we can give some actual engineering analysis to these, some type of methodology that makes sense to digest so that we can feel comfortable with these numbers. But that's what we're hoping to create, is we have the backup data, enough examples, it's been vetted to indicate that, again, if you increase your flow rates, depending on the tributary area by a certain amount, that certain amount, we feel comfortable, shouldn't be causing any issues, as long as there's no other factors involved that would need consideration. So if it's already a known area where the infrastructure is undersized, then, obviously that would come into play, and there would be another component to that to say, sorry, we can't exempt you because we know that infrastructure is already an issue, to give one example.
All right,
Okay, that would be that component. So then, let me go back to number 3 here, under the ordinance. So on your screens, this is what the ordinance currently looks like. And what this says, it's a hierarchy. So what this basically says is that you take your project area, your hydrologic disturbance, anywhere you're doing grading, regardless if it's impervious area or not, you're taking that area and you're multiplying it by 0.15, and then that's gonna basically let you know how much your release rate can be for your development. So that is just a straight calculation. These numbers here, they are based on basically CMAP analysis from the 80s, where you had a lot of combined sewer areas, a lot of sanitary permits, and it was basically kind of continued. So that's number 1. So you do your calculation there. Then number 2, something that we were kind of discussing is there a more restrictive flow rate that needs to be used, or that the certified community has adopted, maybe for that area, they know that it's a flooding issue, so you do a little bit something different there. And then number 3 is the existing condition peak runoff rate. And that is designed for any depressional area. So if your land has a lot of pockets and it's able to hold the water and not release it, then you would be held to that release rate, as opposed to calculating your improvement area and multiplying it by the 0.15. So pretty straightforward there. If there's any questions, okay. So this is going to be completely different. As I'm aware, what we're suggesting is to move away from that idea. What we're looking to do is actually, instead of saying, get your project area and multiply it, and this is how much you can release, we're looking at it as more of a reduction. You're doing impervious areas, we want a flow reduction off of that. We want to slow the water down. That way you're not necessarily, it's almost like you're eliminating the areas where if it was grass there and it's going to be grass again, then there's probably no real change in that area. Under this method, you're not going to have to worry about that, whereas currently you incorporate that as part of your release. So in this case, you're really primarily looking at your impervious areas. In addition to that, and again, I highlighted these numbers because again, we're kind of working through to see what that reduction would be. But the reason why I stuck 0.85 in there is basically, if you look at one CFS, it was 0.15 here of what you can release out. So we just kind of use 0.85 as kind of a placeholder. And actually, when we ran some examples, I didn't include the data here for you guys, but in TAC, when we ran some examples with this, it came up with some very similar results to this 0.15. Part of the concern for engineers was that, well, if you're telling me that I don't, I just need a reduction and I can do X, Y, and Z, then I can potentially eliminate detention. And so that was the idea of giving you some examples. Like, you really can't do that unless, and this ties into the curve number data here, unless you go in and you install some more green infrastructure to bring down your flows, you're not going to be able to escape the reduction component. So in this case, what it looks like, same type of analysis, you calculate your existing, you come to your proposed, and you figure out how much impervious area you have. Then you multiply your impervious area by this reduction. And so let's say your existing release is 50 cubic feet per second. You come in, you do this analysis, and you get, for your impervious area, you need a reduction of 20 cubic feet per second. You would take that 20, subtract it from the 50, so your release rate actually is 30 CFS. So that way, so in this case, you're working more off of existing conditions, your proposed conditions. The reduction is always going to be a proposed reduction off of your impervious surface, where currently what ends up happening is you're using, to Carolyn's point, as the rainfall data increases, your proposed release rates are based on that, as opposed to just, some reduction number that we want to use off impervious surfaces. So whether the intensities go up, go down, you're getting that reduction on that impervious surface. And what this allows you to do too is, because of that factor, now you can incorporate more green infrastructure. The ordinance pushes you to basically do a detention basin. And I don't know about you guys, but we have plenty of holes in the county. So if you can do green infrastructure or other components, or like a farmer, for example, maybe he transitions a portion of his farm field to hay field, or something like that, where you're getting more ground cover annually to help reduce that runoff impact, then why not? Because it keeps more of their land in production. This also, in a way, should help reduce the amount of detention volume that you need, because it's not looking at areas that stay as pervious. The other thing we did look at was having some kind of reduction for, like, if you're impacting a wetland area or a highly wooded area, something that provides a lot of impact. If you're going from, wooded area to grass, we feel like, okay, yes, it's still vegetated, but the impact from mature trees as opposed to some turf grass, we felt like that's something that we probably want to include. So you can see there, it's just meant to be a smaller reduction than what we would have for impervious area. And so in this perspective, going back to this idea, this is still maintained. So in this case, when I ran the numbers, basically for this area now that you're releasing here, what it's going to show is that your reduction is going to basically bring that release rate down to 0, because in the existing conditions, you had, like, let's say 1.5 CFS, and then that reduction for your impervious area ends up, hey, you need a reduction of 3 CFS. Well, if you're already at 1.5, if you subtract out that 3, that basically brings you to 0 here. So that's just indicating that, hey, we want you to take a look at your design, because you're capturing a lot of tributary area that wasn't going to this point. And I think that's part of some of the arguments of, you have a huge subdivision where you have different tributaries going different ways. Now you're concentrating it into this one corner, and you're really affecting that owner. So smaller storm events are having almost the same impact as prior storm events, before you did the improvements, but, you know, longer term. So the 100-year may have been an impact. Now when you do that concentration, now maybe even the 10-year is starting to have an impact. So we're still working through some of those details of, well, what happens then, and we're thinking about a hierarchy where maybe we try to push people towards the tension. Like I said, in this case here, there's a depressional area, so that's gonna factor in. So we're looking to have a little bit of a hierarchy to say, okay, here's what you do, and then ultimately maybe it's some kind of, you know, 50% of this existing is what you're allowed to release. So in this case, this person's detention area is going to increase to account for the fact that they're introducing more tributary area to this point than previously was introduced. And so that's why I kind of alluded to the fact that this in a way takes into account downstream capacity concerns. You still might have them there, which will still factor, but it should hopefully help improve the situation. So this ideology is new. No one's doing like a reduction component, but you're able to do a lot more. So one example I'll give for you guys is solar farms. They're having impervious areas that is their driveways and things like that, but they're also coming in and doing a lot of natives that are adding benefit. So under this idea, they would have a reduction based on their impervious surface, but because they're going to the natives, as long as it's established appropriately, then that's actually allowing them to get a significant reduction. And so that native area would become their stormwater management system long-term that we would track for maintenance purposes. But it eliminates that, well, you need to do a detention basin, and let's not forget for these solar farms, if they ever go out of production, if we want to go back to ag, if you've now added piping and detention and things like that, you can't really go back to farming the land like it was. But one thing that was talked in the TAC was, well, why not do an exemption for solar farms? And my thought is, well, why not allow anybody do it if they wanted to introduce a rain garden or a green roof or some of these other type of ideas. Permeable surfaces are a great idea because under this analogy, if you were to do a permeable surface, you're still gonna have to do a release rate under current conditions. Under these new rules, you're removing that from your reduction area because you're getting that infiltration. So it's just a cleaner way, simplifies it when analyzing this. So hopefully I didn't lose everybody, or if there's questions. And again, this is early stages, but it's important to let you guys know where we're at, get feedback. And again, we're working through some of these numbers. We're working through finalizing this curve number table. Currently, we don't know what to do with wetland and native garden areas. So obviously you can see here, we've thrown a really low number that would impact that flow. We're gonna try to vet that as best as possible and come up with a number that makes sense. But this is meant to give alternatives or incentivize to move away from just your common hole in the ground detention basin. So part of this, which we're starting to also work on, is long-term maintenance. Obviously with a detention basin, at least a hole in the ground will still provide some benefit even if it's not maintained long-term. But with some of our things we're looking to do, track long-term maintenance, we're hoping that we'll be able to capture that. And what we're seeing too is that these detention basins oftentimes, sure, they're not maintained and they provide some benefit, they're becoming long-term issues for just pollutants to kind of migrate, concentrate, and reach into that local environment as well. So with that, yes.
One quick comment, when you go back to your exhibit with that
This?
one. Yeah, I guess as I read through some of the proposed changes, one comment or thought I had was it would be good to identify on-site tributary versus off-site tributary, because it just to make it clear. And then in like your exhibit here, or your example with existing versus proposed, it doesn't, in my opinion, at least from when I understood it, it doesn't take into account off-site tributary. So in the existing condition, you may have a lot of off-site tributary going through your tributary area 2, which when you do your new design analysis in the proposed condition, now you're taking that additional tributary area that isn't no longer going out where 2 was, and it's gonna go out towards tributary area 1. So that offsite tributary could really increase and or should at least be considered when you're starting to do some of the analysis. And I wanted to mention.
The thought process is that most of the time you'll be bypassing that, so you can, that's one of the
True.
things that's being discussed is.
But I think if you're gonna bypass it, because I know the ordinance does allow that, but if now all of a sudden you're dumping everything down in the bottom right corner,
Correct.
you need to bypass that through tributary area 2, and it still needs to
Right.
exit where 2 is. So there should be
Yes.
some distinction of that, and that's, I think, what I was trying to get at. So you're not.
I see what you're saying. Yep, I would agree. Yeah, so like if you have offsite tributary area that was also going through number 2, that's now gonna be passing through number 1 as well, adding to.
Correct,
Right,
and that's what I was talking
Yep.
about, like trying to distinguish between onsite and offsite, just so you're not, because that offsite tributary isn't included in the design of the downstream capacity, but then when you
Right,
add it,
you're
totally.
redirecting through the design on site now. The reason why I only got to this point is I was just trying to not get too far ahead of myself, because I wasn't sure if, number one, even when I present this to the TAC, am I just gonna get, killed over this idea. It was well received, so we thought let's present it here just from this perspective, and we can start tacking in some of these other components, but no, that's a very good point, so.
And then the only other comment or thought I had was, sometimes, I know it sounds like you're going with it's okay to have an increase in downstream discharge a little bit, based on the exemptions.
Right.
With that, one of the problems I've seen over the years too is sometimes it's not necessarily the increase in the discharge, it also has to do with the duration of it. Where when it's raining and somebody may have an overland flood route in their backyard and it's raining, the water goes through, storm leaves, it's dry within a day. When you put the detention basin upstream of that, storm goes through, it holds the water, now it's discharging over numerous days. And so that backyard drainage swale, which once was dry in the large storm, now it's wet for 14 days, 7 days as the pond is slowly draining down. And so sometimes that was always an issue too with, like not just necessarily the volume of water, but also the duration of it. And that's a hard nut to crack, and I don't know how you.
That's kind of what I think we're trying to analyze and take into account, that, we think of some of these scenarios and these values, what would have some implications tied to that volume, high water level, durations. And so the idea is hopefully we can come up with some numbers and have the backing to say, well, here are some examples that would show what durations would look like and how long that portion would be inundated or how much. And can we get there? I don't know. It's just, part of the exemption. As I mentioned, that the part that is vague here is demonstrate to me that that there will be no resultant flood damage. I don't, and that's where it's like, well, how do we demonstrate that? How do we provide some clear instructions on how to do that? And so that's why, this comparison of existing versus proposed is our starting point. We may come to some other factors that might influence this as well. And certainly that's where, any input is helpful into the discussion at this point.
And then I had one question. I apologize, I was late, so I may have missed it. But is that flow tool, is that going to be open to the public, or is it just like county members? Because I'm just thinking if the county says, yeah, in the ordinance, there's this flow tool, but then us municipalities who have adopted it now, do we have to buy that?
No, we're hoping to have it on the website where it'll be a full tutorial, and then for people that might not be well versed. Some municipalities can use it, engineers can use it, if people kind of understand this, and something that hopefully it'll become more clear with this GIS meeting on this flow tool capabilities. It might help streamline this a little bit better even. We're hoping to make it available, and then part of the discussion is to provide consultations from staff where maybe someone has no idea, they don't want to touch it. They can schedule an appointment and, this can get figured out, and then we can have a determination ready for them whether or not they can meet the exemption, and then they can take that, obviously, submit for a permit and include it. Whether or not that consultation requires a fee, and is it, once a month, here's the time slot, so that way if you get jammed up with those, or if your municipality wants to adopt that idea, at least it's like, sorry, we're full for the month, you're gonna have to find the next available time slot type of thing. Yeah, we're hoping, everything should be readily available and hopefully make the process much easier. So
Okay.
there obviously are a lot of hurdles here that still need to be overcome, but at least this was kind of the initial idea and a true change for number 3 and how that release rate is looked at is gonna be different than pretty much everybody else that is doing it. So if there's any fears on that, that's where the TAC was until I was able to get them some examples and flush that out to them. They were probably the most silent I've ever seen them, but I think it's just something new, but I took it as a good thing. So, but there were a ton of questions that stemmed from this that, I had told them, I didn't want to spend time and then if you guys were just gonna, shoot a lot of holes into it where it didn't make sense to continue. So that's why I didn't vet a lot of this, extra stuff, so.
Okay. So you're done with that section?
I believe so, unless anybody has any
And
other.
that one, we're just gonna let you guys perfect that.
Yeah.
We're not gonna do anything on that. So reports 7.1, update on FEMA discussion regarding small accessory structures in the floodplain.
Correct. So this was in your memo. So I sent you guys a memo last month. So I was trying to make sure that I came back to some of those items. Unfortunately, I didn't put anything in your packet because it basically, the discussion with FEMA, the background is this. We have a lot of small sheds, less than 150 square feet even, that don't trigger building permits. A lot of these are proposed in floodplain areas where maybe the floodplain is, a tenth or 2/10, 2 inches, 3 inches, something along those lines. I was hoping to work with FEMA to try to figure out, hey, for these small sheds, number one, the damage that they pose is minimal. And number two, if they were damaged, like no one's pulling in flood insurance policy on it. Let's be honest, right? They're just gonna replace that thing if it collapses and buy a brand new one, type of idea. Is there a way we can eliminate some of these requirements, primarily the flow-through vents, make it difficult? These are prefab sheds. A lot of the times it's hard to put a hole in some of them, or people, they're not skilled in doing that, and it's just driving up costs, things like that. So looking to eliminate some of those requirements or try to get an exemption. I was basically told no, and that was the end of it. So, unfortunately, if it's a 20 square foot shed, and it has 4 walls and a roof, it's a structure, it needs to meet these floodproofing requirements. It's gotta have the flow through vents, it's gotta be anchored, it's gotta have X, Y, and Z. I don't have any other way around it, and that is strictly a FEMA criteria through the NFIP. If we don't meet that, we currently, we discussed previously, we don't have NFIP status, that affects flood insurance, lending, a whole slew of other things that we won't get credit for, and that's gonna extend to our municipalities, obviously, as part of that. But so there's unfortunately no way but to keep permitting these. So if someone comes in for a small shed, we just had one, it's like someone's trying to put it next to a patio and a little entertainment thing pops up, you can, for a little bar area. I think it was like 50 square feet or something small. Got to issue a stormwater permit. What we're trying to do is limit those fees down, but yeah, the anchoring, a lot of the times we're eliminating the compensatory storage as part of that. So that's not a FEMA requirement. We just don't feel like that's enough for us to, do that. But the flow-through vents, flood-resistant material. So Carl, your shed, flood-resistant.
Thanks for going to bat.
There's nothing really you can do about it at this point. I tried, but it ended up being a shorter phone call. No, and I said, well, and I tried to say, well, what if we have certain exemptions of here's the ground height, here's how high the floodplain gets. I mean, truly there's a difference between an estimated foot of flood height versus 1 to 2 inches. No, and I get their stance on trying to make sure that there's no issues, but so that's the update there. So unfortunately, that's going nowhere. So status quo there on that one, but.
Okay, watershed planning update.
Yes, we're, I don't know where that went, but if you have some questions, you might be able to answer some of that. So we're at a point where we'd like to bring in a project manager for that portion, what that project manager.
Say that again.
A project manager. So this would be a consultant. What they're going to help us do, we've identified someone. So Adam will be presenting that upcoming PED August meeting. So I don't want to go too much into that because he's got those details. But essentially, this person is just going to help create a map of the county, and we're going to now know how much we're going to do or what we're going to do, and that's going to give us the structure. So within each sub-watershed, then we're going to have an estimated budget and a timeline for the different activities, and they're going to help us, put a lot of that together. So this is kind of the first step to then be able to put a full proposal for a watershed planning, the full costs, timeline, and we're looking to do it in a way where, depending on the budget, and we don't know where grants are going to be coming from, we're going to try to apply to as many grants to fund as much of this as possible. We're going to look to partner with our municipalities, stakeholders, townships, drainage districts, roadway districts, etc. On this to where the committee will have an ability to determine, and we'll try to prioritize it a little bit of where we think that this area needs this first, to prioritize some of the spending if we're not going to do it all at once. This is going to be currently, I think we've shared the map with you where we have 3 main watersheds. So we're looking at about a 2-year process, 3-year process for each. However, the Fox watershed, for example, it has a lot of this work done. So we're going to try to not duplicate as much of this effort as possible. This will include water quality. It will include flooding. So CMAP has done a study on our county. We're hoping to get that data from them. We're working with them right now to be able to use that. So we're not duplicating efforts again. So hopefully that'll help drive some of those costs down. But that's where we're at with that, is we're hoping to get someone on board and then have a full proposal ready for next year's budgetary meetings when they start up in April and May. So Adam, you missed that, but the watershed planning PM role, I was just indicating we're hoping to get a PM on board to help us.
They said you're offering half of your salary to pay for it.
That's right, yeah. It was 5/8 before the meeting, yeah, so I'll take half.
That's a weight reduction.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know if there's any questions there, but we're hoping as we develop that and that PM comes on board, we'll be able to keep you guys up to date. Now I do want to share something with you guys real quick. I didn't have on here, but just to highlight this, we have developed an outreach tool for this process. that we're looking to finalize here with GIS. That would allow folks to come in. Again, it's similar to our viewer, but let's say you're this property owner and there's erosion issues, flooding issues, whatever it is. You can either drop in a point, or you can kind of say that it's in this area, let's say. And no name, no phone number, it's optional, but basically, what are you trying to make us aware of? Maybe it's some other thing. Enter in the comments, so we're in the testing phase. They can include a photo, and then essentially that would get submitted to us. And now we'll be able to take all that information, and so you can see some of the others, and have a map like this where we can start to see hotspots in different areas as part of our outreach, to give people an opportunity to give feedback to us of what they're seeing. So this is going to help us. Obviously we've got limited resources on what we're going to do here, but it'll help us understand where some of those hotspots are. Maybe help us make decisions to direct funding into some of those areas as opposed to other areas.
Are you afraid of any abuse on that?
Yes.
Because if let's say I didn't like Joe down the road, and I went onto his property and I put flooding area, now it draws you to him, right? Even though he's on top of the hill?
Correct. I mean, this is not going to be used for any type of reporting or violations or anything like that. We have a separate process for that. So the idea is staff will vet those comments, and if we determine, or even it's an ability for someone to just talk poorly of committee members, staff members, board members, whatever it is. That's why we ask for an email, or if whatever someone enters, we'll be able to see that, and you block that person from continuing to make comments that are not this or this. Or what we can do is, we have an ability with this admin login to reply to them and say, hey, this is really not the place. If you want to report a violation, here's the link to do that, and be able to do that with this. But yes, we do have concern that we're going to be inundated with potentially garbage, so to speak, for lack of a better word. But internally, we do want to be able to flag those comments that are well thought out, that are good. So one way this can benefit, for example, as I mentioned, we're going to be creating that map, right? And that map, essentially, what it's going to do is we aren't going to walk every mile of every stream and creek. So at some point, it's going to get categorized. We've walked so much, we feel comfortable that we can kind of continue that assessment. Well, someone along that might end up putting in a comment that might say, oh, hold on, maybe we shouldn't be doing that, and allow us the ability to then go investigate that. Maybe we're to capture it more appropriately. And we're hoping that we can make the comments that are valid and valuable. We can have a map that people can go to it, or maybe not for internal use. We certainly don't want. We certainly want to maintain the anonymous nature to this. That's why we felt like with an email, anyone can create. I'm sure you guys might have even just dummy emails that you use for stuff because you're not afraid of getting spam or whatever. So anybody can really do it, but we do want to, and then the other point is if someone's just making a good comment, but we can't quite figure it out, it gives us the opportunity to just coordinate with them and be like, hey, we're not really clear on what you mean by this. So,
With this tool, are you gonna then notify communities? So is there like if somebody's saying, hey, this area is flooding in Woodstock, I'd love to know about it, because if I don't know about it, I can't do anything about it.
Yes, we're gonna make an announcement. We're trying to roll it out for the fair to have a QR code. So it's gonna go out to everyone, and then as we continue the watershed planning, we're hoping hey, let's partner with these municipalities. Certainly we'll make you abreast of the feedback that you're getting, or If there's stakeholders that aren't interested, we can let them know, well, hey, there's a significant amount of comments here. If we don't get participation, part of this participation is when we develop the solutions to some of these ideas. They're gonna go in incorporated areas or other areas. There's gonna be long-term maintenance agreements that are gonna be needed as part of that. So obviously, if we don't have the support of the stakeholder municipality for that property, it's gonna be difficult to implement those long-term. So this could be a way to show people, like, there's quite a lot of interest in your area, in your jurisdiction. You may wanna look into this and coordinate, and yeah, we'd be more than happy to share this. That's the whole goal.
Yeah, no, because it would be good. I mean, or if somebody says, please contact my community, because we have people who call us and it might be something in the county, or sometimes they call you thinking it's the county that would take care of it instead of the cities.
Yeah, we just implemented a very similar program, but it's all for all public works. Could be, someone can type in through the GIS, they can type in their address, pull up their house, and then click whatever issue it is. It could, or their neighbors, they can take a picture of it. It comes right to us. If it's a street light, we've designated every ComEd street light, so once they click on that street light, it just prompts them and says, please contact ComEd at this. So to his point, if it was in Cary or Woodstock, if there was something maybe prompted that says, please contact the village.
Yeah, I think that's something that, as it comes up with staff, if it is a particular issue where this looks like maybe someone has an issue, we'll definitely be directing them to you and make you aware of that particular comment right away. But early stages, we want to collect the data. One of the things that I haven't really thought about or discussed is how we're sharing this with you guys, the municipalities. We can certainly make that data available for you guys as well. So if you want to take it and implement it in your own way, that's not a problem. It's all going to be exported through GIS capabilities or similar systems. So if you're using some kind of tools that have the ability to integrate with GIS, absolutely no problem giving and sharing that information. So anyway, so I just wanted to share that, because there's a lot of excitement behind it, and we feel that it's going to help us. It's going to be an easier time when we do the outreach. If we have this, when people are expressing comments, that there's a map and we can go to it and use it and communicate, and people can go and see that their comment has been looked at and potentially like what has been prioritized, high, medium, low. I'm sure we're gonna get a lot, well, I can't mow my grass in this area, can we, in looking at that comment, is there more comments around that, or is that something isolated? So with a comment like that, we might put low priority on it. So then if someone's like, well, why'd you put low priority? Well, we can have those discussions now, and there's a little bit more of that interaction, and hopefully, an education process is part of that, and getting people to care more about this stuff, and in long term, just not flooding and water quality, and so.
All right. Okay, with that, do you have any other future topics that you want to discuss?
Just to let you guys know that the new MS4 permit has been released. We are working through that, creating a game plan. So we are keeping our municipalities in mind with that to try to give them credit as much as possible, to take advantage of anything that we do. We are scheduled for an August 20th inspection from the IEPA, as we understand it. It's kind of a semi-audit potentially tied into that. So when we know more, we'll bring you guys more, and we'll let you know what impacts that might be on staff to be able to complete this, these requirements or these commitments, what it might mean to SMO changes. We're still working through that, so.
What date? Again, sorry, August what?
August 20th, I want to say, is the inspection. So we don't really know what they're going to be looking for. We think they're going to be looking at the previous reports that the county has done, but we're prepared if they want to go, primarily our main facility related to this is DOT, where we store a lot of chemicals, salts, road solvents, things like that. So we are prepared that they might want to go out and take a look at some of these facilities and have the information, but we're also looking to, ask any questions that we might have from these, from the new permit changes. So also, we're gonna send an email, there's a workshop coming up, I think next week. So if some of you, there's a workshop for these changes. I think it's from like noon to 1 or 1:30. There's a $30 fee, so if you're not aware, we're gonna send it out to the committee just in case if you do wanna sign up or be a part of that. You can tune in, but it's something that we've highlighted on our end to be a part of, so. Yeah, so it's an ongoing process, but.
Okay. Any other announcements? Nobody? All right, motion to adjourn. Mr. Kaminsky moves. Carolyn Campbell gets a second today. Those in favor?
Hey.
All right, see you next time.